I'm Bob Jacobson. I'm the Dean of Undergraduate Studies, Interim Dean of Undergraduate Studies, and it is my honor to welcome you to this session of our program. I want to point out something about the program first, which is that you're in one of the gems that makes Berkeley an incredible thing. Not just the physical space, the Morrison Library. It's almost an evolutionary thing. We have grown to love and respect places like this that are quiet and full of books and look good. But the idea of a series now in its 17th year in which we talk to our colleagues about what it is that they do as creative writers and as scholars, about their process and how they accomplish the wonderful things that they do, is also a gem of Berkeley. It's a rare opportunity to be able to have these conversations with and about colleagues who are so accomplished at what they do and learn how they do it. I'm a physicist. My writing is the turgider the better in some sense, but it's often the case where I encounter a piece of writing and I say, wow, that is exactly what I wish I knew how to say. And here is a chance to learn from people who actually do write these things that bring to mind this, wow, that's exactly what I wish I knew how to say. So Professor Nesbet is our victim, probably overstates it, but is the person who will be discussing her process today. She is accomplished in several spheres, both as a scholar who works in areas that I'm sure she's about to tell you about, but also as a writer of more popular books. The combination of the two and the working processes that lie between those, I think, will make for a fascinating program. So I'm just going to get out of the way and ask you to help me welcome her to the program.
Thank you very much for coming. It's a beautiful day today. We never know how long the beautiful days are going to last, so it's very kind of you to come in out of the sun. I mean, actually, of course, we're all happier to see rain than sun these days. But thank you so much to Steve Tollison and the library for having me here. This room is very special to me, actually. I went digging through old boxes, that means old files on the hard drive, and I found that in a novel that went directly into the drawer years and years and years ago, I had set the central scene of it in the Morrison room. And so I pulled up that file just to see what was going on. And in that, all the characters in the book, because I wanted to make it very modern and exciting. There were many characters, many different points of view, and they all assemble here to hear a poet recite. And the poet surprises them by starting not with his own work, but with another poem that he just happens to love. So I thought I would just do that, which is the poem that the poet reads in the Morrison room, which is described as, let's see. So we have a character named Ben Paul, who's a professor. And we have his wife, Zippy, who's sitting over there, actually, with her 3 little children, who are being good for the moment. Every time Ben Paul climbed the library's front steps, made that brisk veer to the right, and entered the paneled and carpeted expanse of the Harrison room, for some reason I thought I had to tweak the name, some obscure corner of his soul rejoiced. Most public universities have quite a number of classrooms, offices, halls, even whole buildings, to tell the truth, that are not very lovely. The paint on the walls grows greasy over the years. The sturdy haunches of 60-year-old metal desks squat by mismatched metal shelves. This is describing my office. Everything somehow long overdue for retirement or sabbatical. But the library's Harrison room, all that intricate plaster geometry encrusting every inch of its ceiling, and that line of wooden balustrades holding back the low galleries, where tables and bookcases and green-shaded lamps lurk with the soft seriousness of armchairs and opera boxes, the Harrison room wanted to make it clear that even Californian halls can sometimes carry a whiff of old ink and papyrus. Zippy was in that room too, that's the wife, sitting in one of the burgundy folding chairs at the back under the windows. She had to be far from the center because behind her chair, the boys sat on the ground with their homework spread out before them. Obi was drawing what he called maps, stepping stone islands and zigzags for trees or mountains. Ben was trying not to look in their direction, she could tell, but so far, so good. He had never quite recovered from the job talk 2 years ago, when in a pause, as the lecturer turned a page over and the audience's polite titters quieted down, a boy's voice had flung itself out into the room. "But Mama, what is onanism?" So everybody assembles, and then they have a poem. And the poem is one that I'm sure most of us know well. It's Gerard Manley Hopkins's As Kingfishers Catch Fire. And I love that so much that I thought I would read it aloud. I was kind of inspired to do so because just now there was a side conversation about being brave enough to read famous poems aloud. So I thought we'd just dive in. As kingfishers catch fire, dragonflies draw flame. As tumbled over rim and roundy wells, stones ring. Like each tuck string tells, each hung bell's bow swung finds tongue to fling out broad its name. Each mortal thing does one thing and the same, deals out that being indoors each one dwells. Selves goes itself, myself it speaks and spells, crying, "What I do is me, for that I came." I say more, the just man justices, keeps grace, that keeps all his goings graces, acts in God's eye, when in God's eye he is, Christ. For Christ plays in 10,000 places, lovely in limbs and lovely in eyes not his, to the Father through the features of men's faces. And there's something about writing fiction and writing nonfiction that always reminds me of that poem, because you have, we might not call it Christ, but there's something about the light of the world that shows up in at least 10,000 places, maybe more than that. And so this morning when I was worrying about what to read, I brought the books out and put them all together on the table and told them to get along and cooperate, which they've not had to do before, the academic work and the kids' books. And so I asked them, how they would get along and what they had in common. And the Eisenstein book sent me to its thesis statement, which appears as thesis statements sometimes do on the very last page of the book, where I say, in Eisenstein's view, the most important aesthetic and philosophical ideas did not languish in some splendidly high-minded isolation. To the contrary, they were waiting to be discovered in the most unexpected places, even in the low humor of a cartoon or a dirty joke. And in fact, what the book represents is years of work in the debris of the Eisenstein archives. Because Eisenstein was a pack rat and he saved everything. And so in there are all these things that don't seem very important on the face of them, like ads for Sinclair Opaline motor oil that he cut out of Life magazine, or brochures on how to shear a sheep that he ordered from the US Department of Agriculture, all sorts of little bizarre, weird, you'd think very unimportant things. And yet in them, again and again, you see his interest in creating an artwork that would, like the Medusa image that he sneaks into Battleship Potemkin of a woman shaking her hair like this, just as things are about to go south on the famous Odessa steppes. But he sneaks in something that, although from a place that you wouldn't expect it, rivets the audience, he hopes, in some bizarre, strange way. So that woman is being Medusa. She is transforming us all into the perfect spectator for the film that we are watching. Eisenstein very much wanted his films to affect the screen of the brain and not just the screen on the wall. So I went through looking for optical instruments at work in the children's books. And I came up with a few. So from the Cabinet of Earths, in which a girl is hauled off cruelly to France and then discovers that a cabal of evil magicians lives around the corner. Always happens in Paris. You have to watch out where you live. We can start with that optical device, the mirror. So here she is just on her arrival to the new apartment building. It was dim in the lobby, and Maya, trying so very hard to be helpful and cheerful, was hauling the umpteenth suitcase in from outside when a shadowy figure caught her eye and made her jump. An actual French person, what would she say? But at that very moment, her dad slapped a button and the lights came on, and she saw it was only her own worried face staring back at her, caught like a prisoner in the glass of the wall-sized mirror, like a strange, sad creature in a cage at the zoo. There should really have been a little label under the mirror to complete the effect. Maya Davidson, 12, human girl, native to California, now found only in captivity. And I noticed that there was this little purple handout made for the talk with extremely terrifying quotations in it. They're terrifying because I think that this must be the first time anyone has looked at that dissertation since 1993. Okay, but a number of them are about Cousin Louise, who is a character in the Cabinet of Verse, who is distinctive in her absolute lack of distinction. And I think that that's also an important optical issue, because it asks us, as many of my non-kids book works do, what's the difference between seeing with your eyes and seeing with your brain? And why is it so scary to realize that much of the time we are not seeing with our eyes, but are in fact seeing with our brain? A hand was tapping Maya on the shoulder. "Excuse me," said an unremarkable woman for the third or fourth time. "Would this be the apartment of Madame Sylvie Miller-Davidson?" Maya did turn around then and looked at her, or at least tried to. She was strangely hard to see. No color to her somehow, just an oddly muted effect, as if there were a curtain of frosted glass between Maya's eyes and her, or a kind of haze in the air almost. Just an ordinary sort of woman, but too vague to be properly ordinary, because ordinary people become more vivid when you pay attention to them. And this woman, well, you couldn't quite focus on her somehow. Do you know how your cheeks and tongue and lips sometimes feel after a trip to the dentist? And my daughter just had her wisdom teeth out yesterday, so that's big at our house. That was what it was like, shaking Cousin Louise's hand. It was like the little bit of the universe containing Cousin Louise made everything around it just slightly numb. Then there is, in fact, another allusion to optical apparatuses in The Box of Gargoyles, which is the second book. So in this, Maya, it's also about Maya. Maya ends up discovering with her friend Falco that the gargoyle statues that had taken up residence on Maya's own fire escape have now moved to the roof of the Bulgarian embassy. So that sets you up. So they go up to the roof and discover these statues there. "I haven't been up here in ages," said Valko. "I wonder how those things got here. Flew, I guess," said Maya. She did not like being stared at by stone creatures. Valko hesitated at her side. Neither of them seemed to know quite how frightened they should be here under the gaze of those so very still eyes. "I'm still curious about what they're made of, too," said Valko, dropping his sodas to fumble around in his pockets for a moment. "I could try scraping a little sample off with my knife. See if it's that fake plastery stuff they use for decoration sometimes. That would be easy to lug across Paris." "Wait, what are you doing?" said Maya. It made her nervous, seeing Valko walk right up close to those staring gargoyles with his Swiss Army knife in his hand. In fact, it made her nervous in two ways at once. For Valko, whose little knife was really very small compared to the statues watching him approach, and for the gargoyles because knives are sharp. Nobody wants somebody poking at them with knives. Maybe even a gargoyle made of stone wouldn't want knives coming his way. "Valko, don't," she said. "Couldn't he feel it?" That crackle in the air around the gargoyles' staring, monstrous, mishmashy heads. It was the smell of rocks beginning to lose their temper. It was the invisible sharpness in the air right before a mountain gives way and becomes boulders and talus screaming down the slope. She was just reaching forward to haul him safely back when the world exploded. Din and dust, the harsh clatter of stone wings, rubble pebbles, boulders, rocks, and there in the middle of all that noise, a human gasp, Valko, and then silence again, instantly. The mountain had fallen and everything was different. Valko was staring up at her from the rooftop with wide, horrified eyes, but he couldn't move because around his neck was folded a stony and inflexible wing, and a stone talon gripped Valko's right arm, and Valko's fingers splayed out a little under the pressure of all that stone, and on the ground beside him, looking very weak and small and ridiculous, was his red pocket knife. It all made Maya very, very mad. She was instantly almost drowning in fury, to tell the truth. She jumped forward and pounded on the gargoyle's back, but being very careful not to pound on places that might jar Valko trapped beneath. "Let him go," she said, so mad that every word of hers was huge and wild and loud. "Don't you even know who I am? Don't you know what I have?" She leaped back a pace, opened her backpack, and pulled it out. The gargoyle's beautiful, lovely, wonderful egg. Yes, gargoyles lay eggs. It only makes sense. Another explosion, rocks and wings and motion and noise. And then they settle down again, and she says to them, "You listen to me. See this pretty egg? If you want it to stay safe, you know what? You have to leave us alone. Go home to whatever stupid cathedral you came from. Go away, go home, goodbye. Valko, are you okay?" "It's like something fell on me," said Valko. "I think, something heavy. Let's get out of here." "Good idea." Maya took a step backward, but she kept her eyes on those gargoyles. "And don't keep exploding like that," Maya said to them. "You've got to slow down. Act normal. Okay, that's it." "Did you just tell a couple of statues to slow down?" said Valko. That was more like his ordinary self, so that was good. "Well, when they move too fast, right? It's like they're movies playing themselves at the wrong speed, which I don't like." That was for the gargoyles again. So we sneak in a little bit of movies, even into the magic. And then last of all, I brought in something that is truly fiction because it hasn't come out yet. This is from The Wrinkled Crown, which is the story that's coming out for kids in the fall of 2015. About a girl who gets herself in trouble by breaking the village taboo against any girl, even so much as brushing up against a musical instrument. Linny not only brushes up against a little musical instrument, she actually sneakily makes her own. So that gets her into lots of trouble, and it gets her friends into lots of trouble. And after much trouble, she finds herself in one of those underground, scary labyrinths that sometimes show up in the middle of stories about trouble. And here's what happens next. She comes up she crawls through earthwormy type tunnels, and she finds herself in front of stone stairs with a statue on them. The statue had a stone lorca, and a lorca is the instrument that Linny should not have made, yet did. The statue had a stone lorca slung across one shoulder, and a sheet of stone paper marked with lines and numbers draped across her other arm. She had Linny's hair and Linny's nose, and she had her stone hands almost beseechingly, one cupped in the other, and from the hands dangled something that wasn't made of stone at all. It was a medium-large ring of some kind of silvery metal that apparently did not tarnish even when left in tunnels for hundreds of years. From it dangled an old-fashioned key, not very large, and unlike the ring it hung from, dark with age, and another little strip of nubby metal as shiny as if it had been born yesterday and covered with odd lines and raised dots. She ran her fingertip over those bumps and then lifted the key ring right off those stone hands as easily as she might have grabbed a coat from a coat hook. "This means there's going to be a door," she said cheerfully to the half-cat. She has a cat with her who's half one thing and half the other, which is sort of like the world that she lives in. She ducked around the statue and looked up the stairs. A surge of encouragement had lifted her up, and then she stopped. In front of her was not one door, but two, nearly identical and side by side, and above them were two words chiseled into the stone. They weren't too hard to read. They said, "Which way?" Linny snorted. Which way? She didn't care which way, as long as it led out. And she had the key in her hand, didn't she? One of those doors would have to answer to that key. That's how stories work. If there's a key and a door, then the key opens the door. Anything else would be ridiculous. The doors were almost identical. Stone doors with a keyhole where a more ordinary door might have had a knob. The blackened key slipped easily enough into the keyhole on the right, but it refused to turn. Then the other door's keyhole, just a smidge closer to the edge of its slab, was formed very differently and wouldn't take the key at all. Linny wasn't an idiot when it came to locks and doors. Keys don't necessarily have to look like keys, so she tried the bumpy, shiny piece of metal in the left-hand door, and there was a glorious moment when it slipped home smooth as silk. That was where it belonged, but it wouldn't turn either. She spent a long time moving from door to door and jiggling keys and locks, trying to catch whatever bulky part of the mechanism was refusing to recognize its own key, but nothing came of that. Then she brought out the few small tools she had nabbed from the cartographer's kit and tried to pick those locks, first the one on the right and then the left, but these doors would have none of that. A long time later, she tried all the tricks she knew, and by the end, she was exhausted and the doors were as closed as ever. She went back down the steps a little ways and rested for a while with her back against the back of that statue. What the heck was going on with those stupid doors? How could you hand someone a key? No, 2 keys, and then not even make sure the keys even worked? Maybe the old mechanisms in those locks had rusted to pieces. Then she was doomed because she could not go back into the earthworm tunnel. She couldn't go back. The half-cat rested with her a while, wandered up to sniff the doors, returned to Linny's side, roamed off again. Linny watched it come and go, and she was so tired, her eyes sometimes saw 1 cat and sometimes saw 2 cats in front of those doubled doors. The doors were so like each other. They were really as like as could be. When Linny tried the eye-crossing trick with them, as she slumped back against the statue, they shivered toward each other, ran into each other, clicked into focus as one door, denser and more mysterious looking than either had been on its own. She let her eyes relax back into the usual way of seeing. 2 doors. The half-cat rubbed its head against her elbow and started up the shallow stairs again. Her heart was pounding as if it thought she had figured something out. She sat up taller, clenching the keyring in her hand, and tried it again. The world blurred. The doors slipped toward each other, closer, closer, and snapped into focus. 1 door, one extremely door-like door, deeper and denser than any ordinary door, and with, she saw now, 2 keyholes flickering a little, side by side. It was an illusion, but it was all she had. So that actually brings us back to the Morrison room, where we do see patterns. So whenever I'm in a place where I'm listening to a talk, I always look around for patterns that are repeating so that I can play the eye game with the patterns, so that you can bring 3-dimensional illusions into 2-dimensional things. It could be that we're too close to the ceiling to do it there, but we can all look up and try. So it's like those magic eye things, but you can do them with any pattern. And in fact, one of the projects that I'm working on now is a collaboration with my friend here, Ehud Isakov, who's a neuroscientist. And we are thinking of turning our mutual interest in how the eye and brain work to help us see things and to see illusions, because in some ways that's all we've got, into a nonfiction work for kids that might or might not be called what we think we see, but would indeed have illusions of this kind in it. So that's a little variety. That's just my a patchwork quilt race through some of the things, some of the places where the things that I work on, even though they come from different worlds, do nod a little bit at each other as they whiz by. Thanks.
Well, welcome again to this event. I'm Steve Tollefson from the college writing programs, and it's my honor to be able to get to talk to Professor Nesbet. I don't know where to start. I have like 16 openings for this. I should start with the one that I was thinking of. So when I first emailed her and asked her about doing this, she said she would, but that at the moment she was very busy. She was in Paris on sabbatical with her family, and she was having to bop down to a silent film festival in Venice. And I rolled my eyes, although she couldn't see me doing that, and I thought, what a sad life she lives, you know, Paris and Venice. But then I thought, the real question is, and you have a lot of stuff going on. You've got kids, you've been chair of the department, you're doing 2 tracks. You know, most people will just write the children's books, but you're writing all this wonderful academic stuff. How do you manage? When do you write? What's going on here?
Well, the trick to juggling many, many balls is to drop most of them. And then the ones that remain, you know, you feel like you're really impressive for doing 2 or 3. So it's sort of chaos. I guess what I've given up, and this is actually a sad thing, is television, because everybody in the film and media department is now working very seriously on television. It's very interesting. The problem is that it takes so long to watch those series properly that I find it difficult. I don't know. I think it's, I'm not happy if I don't have a project going. So I have to be living in more than one world at once. That world can be an academic project kind of world. So when I'm working on Eisenstein, or now I'm working on film and architecture in the Soviet 20s and 30s, and when I'm working on those things, I'm just as swallowed up as I am if I'm writing about some magic, non-existent place. But I have to have that other layer going on to feel happy. Again, it's sort of an illusion, like I'm not sure, you know, I think that it won't work up there. It might work in the carpet though. But it's like the 3D, 2D illusion.
But in practical terms.
Yeah, okay, there you just have to keep going.
I'm not going to let this go. So when do you write? We'll just,
right.
Because are you teaching this semester?
Yeah.
Okay, you're teaching this semester, and you've got the new book. Are you done with the Wrinkled Crown?
Oh, yeah, well, so at the film festival where I was suffering mightily watching the silent film, so we watched, which was great, and we watched the 5-hour Nibelungen from the 20s, which is the most depressing, full of carnage film you will ever see. It's absolutely worth your time. So I came back from that screening and then finished the revisions on the Wrinkled Crown because they were due that very minute. So at 3 in the morning in Venice, I hit send and got them back to the editor. I think it's, you're always running. The happiest times are when when you get in the role of either drafting or revising, and you're so caught up in it that you don't have to make time for it. You have to kind of make time for the rest of your life, and you find yourself thinking about these things as you walk along. So I tend to get, I hope to get a little bit obsessive about things and then be carried along by that. But the trick is really to do a little bit every day, just like everybody says. So you do write, you do try to write, but you don't have like a set time, you just are going to write today at some point? I do best with motivations like word count and so on, to try to do a certain amount of words every day. So when I'm in the drafting mode, it's like 1,000 words a day and walk 3 miles or something. And I use, for some work, both academic and fictional, I use the program Scrivener, because it has such, I don't know how many people have tried Scrivener. Okay, but here's what I love about Scrivener. It's got this, you can track your progress and this gauge that goes, you tell it how long your thing is going to be and when it needs to be finished by, and then it breaks up what you have to do every day. Then it gives you 2 little lines that move from red to green. The one is the overarching one that does, tells you how you're doing on the whole project, and then the other one is how you're doing today. And it turns out I work very, very well with the kind of whip of, I don't want to leave it red. I want it to go to green. I'm very simple. I'm basically a lab rat. So this,
Is this something, do you think that someone like I could use in my class? Could I make my students have this on their computer? Would it work for them?
It depends on what they want to, what they're doing. So
well, they're only trying to get through it, you know that.
Right. If you want to get people to, it's very, very helpful for people who have a large project. So if you're writing a thesis, I think it would be very, very helpful to have something like this that every day says to you, hey, red to green, you're doing well. You know, even if your red to green is like 200 words, I think that would be helpful. I mean, the problem with large projects is that we do not have people cheering us on. So it all has to be, somehow we have to figure out a way to keep moving without pretty much any positive reinforcement, life being what it is. So
you sort of spoken out of both sides of your mouth here in a good way, and that is you don't have anyone to cheer you on, you have to have a way to keep going. But on the other hand, you said, you know, once you're in the drafting and revising, it's hard to get you to stop.
Right.
And I think that, you know, we have a mixed audience here of students and older people, writers. And so maybe you can talk about that. How can you have both feelings at once, since I think a lot of people don't have the, ooh, good, I get to revise for 6 hours now. Okay, so revision. When I go and talk to schools, I show them on the screen one of my revision letters for, I think it's the Box of Gargoyles one. Anyway, it's 13 pages long. And I point to the line in the letter that says, in like the top of paragraph 2, when I first read this book, I didn't think, this is my editor speaking, when I first read this book, I didn't think it needed as much work as I now see that it does, right? And then it goes on, and I click through the slides, or I went to, for 13 pages. Those letters are the most amazing things that I've ever received. I think one of the great sorrows about academic life is that editing doesn't happen nearly as much as it used to, or maybe I'm just positing that there was some kind of golden age when people edited. But when I got a 13-page letter to help with the editing of the first novel, I wanted to frame every page of that and put it up on the wall. It was so astonishing that someone would be looking with such kind but critical eyes at something that I had made and also wanted it to be as good as it could be. So I actually love revision. And I think it's the, you know, if I could go out and proselytize and, to kids, it would be about revision, how wonderful it is to have that chance to make something truly better, really just dig away at it. So that we should just then launch into the, it's hard to talk to her because I wanted to, she has these 3 streams of writing and I want to be able to talk about all of them sort of independently and together. So the third stream that we have not mentioned, so there's the academic writing, and then there, I don't know how we call the, what's the category of the young person books? It's not... They're middle grade. Oh, so they're called middle grade books, okay? Because they're not young adult, they're a little younger than that. Right. Barnes & Noble files them under 9 to 12, and in fact, I had to change the age of the heroine in the first one. Just to so fit that she was not older than 12. So that's a violation of art, right? We've just gone right to marketing? Yeah, marketing, okay. There's a little short circuit between art and marketing. So anyway, and then there's the blog. Now I know that when writers do publish a book, you really have to have a web page and a blog. It's just part of the deal if you're going to survive. But when I went to the blog for The Cabinet of Earths and the other books, I was crushed to discover that this, I hope some of you picked it up, 7 Ways Revising is much like combing out tangles in your kid's messy hair, because I thought, well, there goes my interview. She has just taken care of almost everything that I would have asked her. But I wanted to print this out for all of you, and I hope you'll pick up a copy, because again, it's a totally different style. It's, you know, it's not the style in the kids' books, and it's not your academic style. So, can you talk about the three faces of Eve? I don't know, you know. No, wrong. I'm sorry. Maybe not. But
Well, I think actually all of us, again, who are messed up with universities have this third style, because we all have to give lectures, give talks, talk to people, introduce films, or so that sort of chatty style is something that we probably all have developed at some point. So it didn't take particular effort to develop the chatty, unscholarly style. And yet, like Eisenstein, I insist that sometimes in the lightest style, the lightest mode, or talking about unimportant things, very important things can seep out.
As our featured author, I don't feel that it's right to contradict you. But when you say most academics have developed this chatty style,
No.
God, I wish more had developed a style like this one. What's the worst part of writing for you?
Well, the worst part is just existential despair.
Just.
But what I say to students is that in the course of doing any project, there is a moment where we have to experience existential despair. Often it's at 2 or 3 in the morning, the day before it's due. But okay, whenever it has to come. So I have this whole little spiel that I go into with students about how every stage of the process is the fun and easy part of the writing process. And I do the whole thing, and then I say, of course, on top of all these easy, fun stages, there's also the moment where you experience existential despair. But what you have to do is you have to tell yourself at that point, even if it's 2 or 3 in the morning, you have to say, I am experiencing the despair that is a necessary part of the process. And you can just like, check it off. Done. But yeah, I've experienced a lot of existential despair. Sometimes it's like, what should I do next? Well, you know, can I ever have an idea again? I mean, I guess I often have that worry. But if you just keep going, usually you find yourself on the other side of the swamp.
So since I have lost any logical train of thought throughout this interview, because you keep making me think of other things, I have to do the analogy and then to you. So when I go see the performance artist Laurie Anderson, who I love, and if you've never seen anything by her, you should look it up on YouTube. I always say to myself, I've never had a creative thought in my life when I watch what she does. So when I read your works, I honestly thought, your academic work, I honestly thought, I've never had a complex thought. Because when I read yours, there's this weirdly wonderful thing. They are perfectly clear, your academic works. Perfectly clear. They are not post-deconstructivist, post-colonialist jargon that I can't understand. I understand every word, but they are just completely dense because your thoughts are so dense, and I can understand them if I read slowly. And I think it's a wonderful trait to have, and I don't remember where I started with this. What was I going to ask you? It was something you said that did it.
Well, you know, what you're sounding like now is like my HarperCollins middle grade editor, although she has a slightly different tone of voice. So she's always saying, Anne, I see what you're trying to hint at in chapter 3, but could you make it clearer? So I spend my life trying to make things clear and then coming back and trying to make them clearer and then coming back and trying to make them even less.
No,
now,
please, I am not your editor. My point was it's amazing that I can understand these really your ideas are complex and that I can follow them, and I learned so much reading those things. I'm still stuck with this from the Eisenstein book. I'm still stuck with a whole section, and you brought it up today, about the ox eye. Yeah. And I've not actually seen the movie, but I can't wait now. And it's in a slaughterhouse, and it's you know, she describes it so vividly that it makes you cringe, and that's just the words on the page. So I think it's just an amazing skill to have. Completely irrelevant. Students, if you didn't know what onanism is, your teacher will be happy to tell you. just from the beginning of that. So you mentioned that you have a novel in a drawer.
Oh, I have, I mean, several.
Talk about that, because people often feel like if they are writing fiction, you know, that if they don't get that thing out there, that they are lost. So.
Oh, well, you know, like many people, I've been writing novels since I was an elementary school student. My first one was called Liz in Artland, and it was going to be terrific. It was about a girl who goes into a modern art world, and, you know, like there's Clay's kingdom and Matisse's kingdom, and everybody's in a war with the creatures in Surya, and I got, you know, like 40 pages into that in elementary school, and then I had a fight with a friend, and she wore it in her rain boot for the day, and it was done. But I still think back fondly on that. But I kept working. I kept writing really bad novels. And so when I say, so Cat in the Verse is the fourth novel that I wrote that I thought that I tried to have published. So before that, there's a whole slew of things that just weren't good enough. The first time that I had two early, tiny little successes. One of them was when I started in graduate school, I was so excited to have a fellowship. I had never had like money. I mean, we're not talking a lot of money, right? We're talking the 4 figures money. But I was very excited about it. So the first thing I did when coming to, and I was in graduate school here in Comp Lit, first thing I did is bought a ticket to Kathmandu, Nepal for $1,300, which was, I don't know, like a fifth of my year's money. And I went to Nepal for 6 weeks, because at that time we had a huge long break between the fall and the spring semester. And I walked around there for 23 days in the hills. I mean, it was just this astonishing thing. And in fact, I was up where they just had the terrible disaster in the Torongla pass. Anyway, so I didn't get up over that pass because it was a blizzard at the time, but I did go look. And in that town, Muktinath, right below the pass, which was in the news so recently, they use the water that flows down in the streams to turn the prayer wheels. And I was so taken with this use of technology to pray, the mixture of these two worlds, that I wrote this science fiction story about a spaceship from, alien spaceship that's sort of discovered, but they can't tell what it's doing. They can't tell what it's, and it turns out to be a kind of prayer wheel in the sky. And the problem is that NASA always thought that everything had to be practical, that there had to be some kind of logical reason for having a spaceship, but there could be these other reasons. And that story was the first time I ever won money for writing. I won there was some kind of graduate student UC-wide contest, and I won, I think $200. But I was very happy about that. And it carried me through decades and decades of no longer getting money to write, but trying hard. So I would send out stories. This was the days of the Macintosh computer, and suddenly you could have a file that was 10 pages long. It was so exciting, people. And I would just write a story that was as big as a file and then send it out to all the different magazines and collect the letters saying, nice try, but eh.
But we have so many wonderful submissions that we can't fit yours in.
Yeah, actually, in retrospect, they were very nice letters, because usually they would say something in particular about the story, and of course, that's extremely rare, really. So, but okay. So I kept going, and then I had those three. I wrote 2 science fiction novels that are in the drawer, and I wrote, and then I wrote the one which has the scene in the Morrison room. Then that was in the drawer because I finished it the same month that I finished The Cabinet of Earth, and I decided just to go with that.
So the lesson here is that you gotta send stuff out. You can't just.
Yeah, the lesson is, I guess the lesson is you keep going and you keep going and you keep going, and part of keeping going is to send things out, whether that's sending it to your dissertation advisor or or, you know, sending it to someone who might publish it or sending it to an agent. And then you keep going, and you always remember that you'll be starting over again with the thing that you think is so perfect and burnished. You're going to be starting over again as if from scratch. If it gets through that gate that you think of as being, you know, the door to the promised land. You go through the door, and then it's like, oh, now start over, and there are many more doors.
So it's not, once someone says we want to publish your book, it's not like, oh good, then you just print it out and...
Right, well, the Cabinet of Verse, they said, we like your book in 2008, and it was published in 2012. So that's sort of a figure. And the funny thing about publishing is that, you know, a lot of it is sitting around waiting. Like this last year, I was on sabbatical, and I said, okay, I'll block out early spring to do the final revisions for The Wrinkled Crown, which is the third kids' book. And otherwise, I'll just be working on film and architecture. I had it all planned out in my calendar. Well, then the edit letter didn't come until I was getting on the plane to come home. So that didn't, you know, then there you are again. The new semester is starting up. You've got to teach. And you have a revision letter, and they would like it back in 2 weeks. I mean, it's, you know, it's just insane. It's hurry up and wait, as people say.
So I want to talk in a little more detail since we're on the kids' book. So you had pointed out that I had quoted in here the descriptions of Cousin Louise, and you actually added, when you read, you added nicely the first part, and without saying anything about Cousin Louise except this, I picked these because these were scattered throughout 2.5 pages or so. And I wanted to know the process, if you could reconstruct it, by which you just dropped these in so that we didn't get a whole description which would give away so many things in terms of the story. So it wasn't until I finished the book that I went back and said, oh, that was really remarkable. So is this kind of conscious? That's what I want to talk about.
You know, by the time you've done like 8 revisions of something, you would think that everything in it would be conscious. And yet it is not true. I do try not to be boring. And so that means cutting out a lot of places where you would just talk about what something's like for a paragraph. On the other hand, you have to keep reminding people, so I don't remember exactly how the revision went on Cousin Louise. She was the first part of that story that I thought of. All the French bit and Maya and everything sort of came to me later, but the first thing I had was Cousin Louise. Someone from whom all the charm has been taken so that other people don't even notice her somehow. There was a hostile act worked on her in her childhood, and one of the things Maya has to figure out is how that happened and what can be done to remedy. Not to really change Cousin Louise so much as to bring justice back.
So that's a really nicely practiced. I couldn't talk about your stories at all because I didn't know what is giving away things and what isn't. So that was wonderful. I think you gave the outline without actually, you could be a politician.
Oh no, I certainly could not.
Outline without really saying anything about the story. Yeah, that was great. So this is for 8 to 12-year-olds. I just have to say that it's not for 65-year-olds because I found it too scary. I think that when you're 8 to 12, you go, oh yeah, I get this, but I was just, ugh. And then I want to ask if this is something you would want. So I found at the end, once things were really progressing and things were starting to become clear, that I started skimming. And I started skimming not because I was bored, but because I was really anxious. And I tried to figure out what was the important thing can I get, because I needed to get to the end. And so does that mean all your words in there are just wasted because I skimmed? Or is it, so actually, is it a good thing or a bad thing?
The falling tree. Maybe. I mean, they were wasted for you. Usually if someone says you start skimming, then the person who hears that should think, I should have done more cutting. But you know, the way that people read books is very individual too. So parts that you may have skimmed over, someone else might latch onto. And in any case, you know what? I don't worry too much about those things, because once the book is written, and published, it's not mine anymore, right? I mean, so you could do with it whatever you want.
Well, of course, when I said skimming, I know you understood what I meant. The only other book I've had that experience with was Memoirs of a Geisha, and I don't know that at the end I was so desperate I just sat and read, which I don't usually do. And I think that's a wonderful quality in your book, that you made me just terribly anxious to find out what was going on. Yeah,
I thought I was writing this like nice magical realist fantasy set in Paris for kids, and some of the early like journal reviews of it used the word horror, and I was very surprised. I didn't think it was that scary, but I guess maybe it was fairly scary. I'm
sort of tender, so.
Yeah, so, I get scared very easily.
So, when you were talking earlier too, you talked to, what was the phrase you used? It was lovely and you need to use it again. Making the books, they have to cooperate now.
Oh, right.
The two sides. So actually I had thought that I saw clandestine cooperation when I was reading some of your articles. So not only the topics of some of the articles, but the titles are just wonderful. In Borrowed Balloons, which is starts out talking about the Wizard of Oz, but ends up being really on the history of Soviet aviation and a myth about Soviet aviation. And then Snow White and Ivan the Terrible. It turns out that Sergei Eisenstein really loved all things Disney, and there are a lot of images in both these. So that's where I see the intersection of these two things. You use popular culture in your academic writing, but in this really skilled, interesting way. I mean, I learned so much about the fact that The Wizard of Oz was a popular book in Russia, but it's sort of a twisted translation and stuff. Is that something that you're conscious of, that you're using the popular culture, or is it just, I mean, when you do that, are you thinking, I've done this before? And...
Oh, no, well, yes. So I grew up as someone who read Oz books all the time, for instance. And in college, I think the college's, the largest children's book collection in any dorm room on campus. So I never left the children's books behind. And I still go back to them, and I'm awed by what I find. I'm teaching children's literature again in Complet in the spring, and it's just amazing what goes on in children's books. Even the complexity of the narration, for instance, is astonishing in some of these older books, like Little House on the Prairie, which has caused all sorts of trouble. But one of the interesting things about it is how complex the narrative voice is and the point of view in that book, which has caused some of its difficulties. But anyway, so all of these things have been with me always, and they do keep popping up. And it was very lucky for me that I ran into someone like Eisenstein as a first academic book topic, because he also loves these things that you'd think had no place in Soviet culture. Snow White. How could Snow White be the basis for Ivan the Terrible, which was supposed to be a kind of hymn to Stalin's power and cruelty? And yet Eisenstein, in a wonderfully perverse way, because he's also, as the lovely woman in Moscow had me over to tea sometime in the 90s, said, he's literally a sadist. She said, why are you working on him? He's literally a sadist. So he brings that lovely sadism to his appropriation of everything. But he loved Disney not just Snow White, but he loved the silly symphonies, and there are these references that just run through what he's doing. So I think it's natural for me to see the world that way, to look at something and think both of maybe, Benjamin is actually a good example because he does that too. I think Benjamin and Eisenstein both had this pack rat approach to culture, which I like. But anyways, I could look at something and I could think a high thought about it, one that I wouldn't be ashamed of sharing, and then I could think all sorts of low thoughts about, oh, this reminds me of that children's book or whatever. But as I've become older myself, I no longer feel ashamed of bringing those to the surface either, because I do think that in those seemingly very simple old things, there's all sorts of deep, crazy stuff going on.
So you were saying about bringing all these things together, and I was wondering about your research. Back to what I said earlier about I've never had a complex thought, I feel, when I've read your stuff. You have such a vast storehouse, and I want to know how you access that on the page. You're referring to this and this other thing and this philosopher and that idea, and I just go, I don't see myself doing that. I don't have that capacity. How do you manage? Where does that stuff come from when you're actually writing? Does it just pop in? Do you have files? How do you source this stuff?
Well, I have the blessing of a very bad memory. So that's meant that I have to overcompensate all the time. And I think that process of compensation for having a really, really bad memory has had two big effects in my life. And one of them is that I love research. I just love it. And I love keeping it in files. Now, they used to be physical files, and now they are sometimes computer files, but I love I love working in an archive or a library and working through issues of magazines. And because I like even the debris and the little stuff, my files are very large and full of all sorts of bizarre examples. So when I'm working on some kind of academic question, I'll go down many, 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 many seemingly dead ends. And then I just read through everything in the files again and again. It's sort of the composting phase. And then I spend an enormous amount of time brainstorming and outlining. This is actually turning into my why every stage is the easy stage of the process. But brainstorming and outlining is easy because it's fun. It's like doing the New York Times crossword puzzle, right? It's something our human brains love to do, is you have all these things everywhere, and the question is, how do they go together? So I love doing that. But I have to do it based on files that I've kept, because in my head, I'm not going to have any of the proper nouns spontaneously appearing. The other effect of having a bad memory is that it turned me into a fiction writer, because fiction was freeing because I wouldn't have to remember exactly how things happen. I could just make them up. So I'm an odd mix of someone with an absolute passion for indexes, because I had such a bad memory that in high school, the way I got through physics tests was just being the best person at using the index. I'm super good at indexes. So on the one hand, it was good for my logical side, and on the other hand, it made me make up stories all the time.
So could you go back and just elaborate one more sentence or two on the composting phase, just because that's such a wonderful word?
Yes. Okay. So back when I started teaching, I used to give PhD students a physical cardboard box, which was a dissertation box, and with the kind of legal folders that close up so you could hold a lot of things, pockets, And for one, I'd say, okay, each folder is one chapter. Here you go, chapter, 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 chapter. Write out what your chapter is about, and you stick it on the front of each of those envelopes. And then whenever you have a thought, you put it in there. Whenever you do something, you put it in that folder. And I said, and it will compost itself. And it will become something that makes sense eventually, but you have to keep everything in there. It's harder now when things have become digital, because there's something about taking out a physical folder and saying, there's a chapter in here, even though it looks like it's newspaper clippings and who knows what, something printed out from the web, I don't know. But so what you have to do is you have to collect everything. You have to keep it somewhere where it's not buried too deeply, either on your hard drive or your desk. And then you have to open that up, whatever it is, and take out all that stuff and look at it. And then when you do that, you write up your thought. As you look at it, whatever new thoughts you have, even if they're not big, shiny thoughts, but a little thought, and you put that in with it, right? And then you don't have to always be rethinking the same thoughts when you come back. And honestly, it works. It's like you keep doing that, and it will begin to take shape.
I think this needs to be an article, the composting folder. I know we're getting close on time. I wanted to talk about a couple of things. So as you noticed, I was going to surprise you, but as you noticed, I read your dissertation. I try to always find the earliest thing that someone has written, and then I'm usually going to say to them, so, in a snotty tone, I would say, so how do you feel your style has changed? Have you matured? And I was just so disappointed because your dissertation was, again, so clear and so interesting and mature. I thought there were some parts that were almost like aphorisms that I just thought were terrific, and I want to point out two of them here. Narrative often struggles with its own half-mechanical, half-living nature. And that made me think that you're sort of interested in automatons, and I see that too. And then the next one, of all styles of narrative, the second person is perhaps the most intrusive and overtly contradictory, because the author is writing through borrowed eyes in a borrowed body which claim to be the reader's eyes. Just thought those were really insightful, wonderful things. But again, I could see that ox eye again coming up with the eyes. You seem to really also like in your academic writing, and I think in the other writing too, contradictions. You like things that don't resolve themselves.
Yeah, I do. Right. Yeah. No, I like worlds colliding, gray areas, things that are both one thing and the other. I like that very, very much. I'm very, very happy about the fact that Ivan the Terrible Part 1 got the Stalin Prize, and Ivan the Terrible Part 2, which is really exactly the same in some ways, got Eisenstein, banned.
Yeah.
So I think there's something, and as I say in the book, it's because in a way that's the proper response to this two-part film, because it is both everything Stalin could have wanted in a film, and it's also a critique and undermining. So I like things like that. I do. It's funny about the dissertation because I did not, my dissertation did not become my first book. I moved to a different field actually, because it was on literature, and then the first book was on Eisenstein. Yeah. And I was looking through the Eisenstein book, and I realized there may be like 2 pages in there that come from stuff that's in the dissertation, and that's it. So I think that's another way in which I've always liked living in more than one world at once. And sometimes it's hard because you have to, moving so dramatically from one kind of project to another takes time, causes stress, but it's very exciting too.
I think we should end there so we can have time for questions. Is there anything that's sort of like the end of the interview? Is there anything that I should have said? Anything I should have asked?
No.
Okay. So we would like to let you all have some time, a few minutes to ask questions, and we'll repeat them just because otherwise they won't get picked up on the mic. So, and we won't sit here endlessly, but John, yes?
You may have already answered this, but since you work in different genres, you write for children, you write academic works, and the way that you may have answered it is because you said you have to deal with deadlines. Can you work on 2 vastly different projects at the same time? Are there different brains you have to switch on and off?
Yeah, I always have. I mean, it's a rare treat to be able to focus on only one thing for a time, and I enjoy that very much when I get that chance. But the bright way, the happy way to look at it is that all of us want to run away from our work. So if you can trick yourself into running away from one project to another project, then it's a win-win situation. So sometimes that works out for me, and I'm able to say, oh, to heck with this revision of the novel. I cannot stand it. Oh my God, all I want to do is go summarize another article in that architecture journal from the 20s, and then it feels like you're doing something really wicked while you work away at something you also need to do. But sometimes you're torn. And sometimes it is hard to turn around. But I think you have to learn how to switch gears without wasting time if you're going to do anything. Maybe.
Why did you choose the age group 8 to 12? Is it because a beginning of maturity and independence and reorganizing thoughts like crossword puzzles or connecting dots or?
Well, I forgot to repeat, as soon as I say I'm going to repeat the question, I forgot. So why did you choose the age group 8 to 12? And then there were some suggestions for why.
Well, I'd been writing things that I thought were for grown-ups, but maybe, maybe my inner middle grade writer was already kind of, I don't know. I think it's because the books that you read during that period, some of them have the deepest influence on a person of anything that you read. They go very deep. So when I think back on the things that I read at that age, there's this, some of them just are nestled deep within, sort of like chickenpox virus or something, only to come out, we hope, in a nicer way than shingles. But I think the YA, so in publishing it, there's a sort of strict divide between middle grade, which is what I've been doing, and then what they call young adult or YA, which is where you need to, the rules are kind of strict there. You have to, there's more romance in the YA, and there's more naked torsos and so on, and I don't know, part of me just wanted to, I might try to do something that's more young adult-like because I tend to go complicated. I mean, in a way, I'm writing middle grade books for grown-ups, which is, but not entirely, but middle grade books that grown-ups that I would enjoy reading.
That I enjoyed reading.
So.
If I could ask another question about your audience. When you're writing a book for middle grade readers, do you ever have to stop yourself and say, wait, no, I'm doing this far too meta. I need to bring it to a level that's perfect?
A question of when you're writing these books of adjusting audience, pausing and saying, I'm writing at the wrong level and need to.
Yeah, so that's part of being complicated and obscure again, I guess. So I try to keep the complicated part and axe out the obscure part. And that's a real trick and something that I always am learning and relearning. And editors' letters each time catch me by surprise by saying something is not clear that I was sure that I had been excruciatingly obvious about. But I'm not good at being obvious, so I have to always work hard. But I don't feel like I have to compromise much writing for kids because kids are incredibly smart. I think that when you pick up a book that is compromising, you notice it, and kids notice it. So I don't aim low for kids.
And I would say that as a recent reader, that's your that's exactly my perception, that I just felt right in the story. That was all. I just felt like I was right there. We have time for one more question if anyone would like to ask.
I'm curious about the relationship between your academic writing and your fiction. Does your fiction, how you write, or not how, but what you write about in your fiction, does it also shift sometimes into your academic writing?
So you're asking whether the fiction influences the academic writing?
Not influences, but something that you include in your, I guess influences is the right word.
I think so. I mean, I think that some of the things that I'm interested in are going to show up. I'm going to see them when I'm looking at objects in the real world for the academic projects, and also see them in magic. What?
Statues, for instance.
Oh yeah, so statues and animation. So the question of animation, how alive something is. I mean, I was like born using personification. I was always really interested in inanimate objects being slightly more alive than we might think. And when I go and analyze films or books, I still have that obsession with the things like, I'm working now on buildings and how buildings can be somewhat more animate than we might think.
So that's your academic.
Yeah.
And so in Cabinet of Earths, the buildings, so that, to answer your question, yes, exactly. That in Cabinet of Earths, the buildings are very prominent and animate in a way. So yeah, great. I can't.
Do I have time?
Do we have time?
Question. I was also struck by the use of what you call optical instruments, and that they seem to be important for you in both kinds of writing. Both kinds of writing.
Well, my grandmother had a stereoscope, and we used to play with that. And then, and there were like pictures of the pyramids and so on. And then one time in Moscow, I saw someone, a friend of many of ours, brought out a stereoscope and these glass stereoscopic slides that were of her parents, I guess, when they were children. So they were stereoscopic pictures on glass of these kids, I think before the revolution, in their little sailor suits and so on. And they were sort of snapshot photos, but stereoscopic, and you looked at them and you fell into this other world. There's something about that. It's always been magical to me, the shift between the second and the third dimension, or the second and a half dimension that we sometimes get.
Well, and that is actually right. I mean, that went right into the book.
Yeah. That
image that you just described us, and I won't say anything more. We must stop. I cannot thank you enough. This has just been wonderful, fascinating. We got through an eighth of the questions I have, so we have to do it again.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
This is great. Thank you so much.